So this is lesson one in a completed model of the human species, the first premise. And of course, I'll go into this premise in much more detail later on. But in the first lesson, I'm just going to let you know you already know this premise, although you don't know that you know it, but I'm going to explain it to you. The human species, right? Let's just think about this. Let's think about natural systems, what they look like. And I just want to get in your mind what a natural system looks like. I want you to think about like elephants and giraffes, and cheetahs and lions and gazelles and Serengeti. And I want you to think about wolves in the forest and the whole dynamic of the ecology and how natural systems operate. You kind of have an intuitive understanding that, yeah, I kind of get a feel for what a natural system is like. And then I want you to think of human systems and take a look at those. And I know that you know intuitively that these human systems are not natural systems. They're not operating the same kind of way. And I'll explore this and go into it in much more depth. But this is the first idea that human systems as they're currently functioning is not as a natural system. And again, I'll define in more detail exactly what a natural system is and how it operates. But here's the important premise, is that we also know that we evolved. And for evolution to occur, we must be a part of a natural system, because that's how the whole thing works. So the first premise is simply this. At one point, we were a natural system, and now we're not. Which you already know that. You intuitively realize what this is, and we can look into many other proofs and dynamics as to why this makes this clear. But let's just assume this premise, right? And let's work from there rather than getting caught down in all the details of why this premise is correct and how that operates, which I'll get to later on. But let's just assume that for now, right? Just go with me. Just allow yourself to say, okay, for now, I'm just going to go along with this. Or you might just say, yeah, that makes total sense. I'm happy to go along with this. Human species was a natural system, is no longer functioning in that way. It's the simplest, most heuristic kind of way of understanding it. And it's fine. And we'll break down the details of how all this happened as we go on. So that's the first premise. Now let me bring you on to 3 questions that will reveal everything. Okay? So, and 3 questions are, okay, so we know that at one point we were a natural system, at this point we're not. So therefore, we must be able to go along the timeline and perceive a point where this changed, right? So that's the first question. At what point in the timeline of the human species did this change occur? Because think about it, it's a huge change. It must be pretty obvious. It must be something big must have happened. It must be pretty clear at that point. Wow, that was a big deal. Things really changed at that point in our development. So that's the first question. Now, the second question is, why? What force caused this to happen? Why did we change from being a natural system to a non-natural system? Or to another kind of system, whatever. We can use words and describe it in different ways. But a system that was no longer a natural system, some other kind of system. Why did that happen? Okay, that's the second question. And the third question is, what impact did this have on the species? What exciting questions, okay? Very exciting to me. I've spent nearly 30 years since I kind of discovered this in 1996. I spent 30 years continually just inquiring and looking into this and getting more insights into understanding the modeling of it better. But that's basically it. So, right, those 3 questions, they are, when did this event happen, that we went from being a natural system to stop no longer being that? Why? What caused that to happen? And what impact did that happen? Now, at this point in the video, what I want you to do, pause this video, go do some research, look into the history, look back, see how far back you can go along the human species timeline, and see, can you find something, this strange event that's really quite spectacular, quite big, everything changed all of a sudden, I think you'll see it when you're looking for it, that it's there. To understand why it happened, well, you might know why it happened, but actually the reason why you went and no longer became a natural system is actually defined in the event itself. It's very clear once you understand it. And then what happened afterwards, what impact it had. And actually, I think you know the impact it had. Once I explain it to you, you'll realize you kind of knew it all along. So those are the 3 questions. Pause this video now. Go search for a couple of weeks. Really look into it. Find it for yourself. It'll be much more interesting when you instead of me telling you, you'll see it for yourself, because I believe you'll find it, because it's not that hard. It's really clear. So, okay, I trust you now. I trust you've paused the video. It's a couple of weeks later. You've done tons of research, exciting research, and you've figured it out. You've figured out the puzzle for yourself, because it's an exciting moment when you become aware of the completed model of the human species. It's an exciting moment for you, for how you perceive the world. It's an exciting moment when the whole world wakes up to this completed model of the human species. It's wonderful. I remember back in 1996 when I first saw this, it was pretty, I don't know how to describe that time, but it was just amazing. The whole world kind of changes in how you perceive it. So I hope you enjoyed your investigation, and I know you found it. I know you found it. So here it goes. I'm going to give you the 3 answers to those questions, right? So when we look back, there's a very specific time when we stop being a natural system. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. It's also called the invention of agriculture. So dramatic a time in all human species development. Such a quick change. There's nothing like it. We kind of, prior to that, we were basically kind of nomadic hunter-gatherers, essentially going around in tribes, and that was it, and we spread it all over the world, and there's about 3 million of us or so, and these are very significant things, that we'd spread out all over the world, and we're still one species, and we'll come back to the significance of that later on in the model. But for right now, this point when we invented agriculture happened quite quickly. It happened roughly between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. It happened over a period of maybe a few thousand years or something like that. But everything changed. Can you imagine the change from being a nomadic tribe to being settled villagers farming the land? What a shocking change to the system. It really was when civilization began, and everything went crazy. I don't want to get into too much, but everything went crazy. I'll talk about it a bit later. Now, so that was when it happened. We've answered that question. That was the moment when we changed. So why? As I said, why it happened is actually, if you look at the event, the very kind of definition of the event is why it happened. The invention of agriculture, the invention of a whole new food supply. So in natural systems, a limited food supply is essential. It's always created. If there's more food, the population expands, so that food supply becomes limited again. And it's just essential. And we can break down why. I mean, if you give any natural population an almost endless food supply, so its population can just explode, natural selection stops functioning. To get a bit technical, the gene trait link is broken, and I'll get into that later. But essentially, when we had this new food supply kind of ushering into the system, changing everything about how we survive, what we needed to do to survive, what we needed to do to get food, it was just available, and natural selection could no longer function. That's the why. Technically, how that works, I'll break down later on. But that's why. Just food. It just made it impossible for natural selection to do what it does, to function across the system, therefore it's a natural system. And then technically what that means, again, I'll get into later on. So that's the why. Now, what impact did it have? Well, everything went crazy, didn't it? Villagers farmed the land, but then they became the classes. One class where they're, think about it, when you're farming the land, you have to protect the land, you have to have a warrior class develop. But also when you have a food supply, so it's not all just about making sure there's enough food going around, you can have a craft or an artisan class, and you can have a ruling class, and you can so on, and it all kinds of changes to a whole different structure. And really, war began, and disease as we understand it today began, and a lot of other things that are difficult began. And of course, it also opened up the opportunity for us to develop and grow culturally and technologically over the past 6,000 or so years, because we just had time to be hanging around thinking about things and developing things and so on. That was obviously an impact. But more importantly, I think we must understand that really the disease, the species entered into a period of being in disorder, essentially being in a state of disease, which is a little odd, and we're going to break this down. And that would be the second premise, is what we're going to explore next. So we've explored the first premise, we've explored the three questions that explain everything, and now we're going to go on to the second premise, which people generally find that they find it quite hard to come to terms with it. So let's take our time exploring this one. But I'll just tell you what the premise is straight up, because it's a tough one. It's natural systems create healthy systems. Obviously, they don't create unhealthy systems because they're not going to be selected for it. It just doesn't make any sense to think that it would evolve a body that is unhealthy and broken. It's not even on the plate that would develop unhealthy systems. It exclusively develops healthy systems like our bodies and so on, ecologies and etc. And I know people sometimes find that hard to see, and there's some reasons for that. There's a few paradoxes and things like that we'll get into down the line. So while we were a natural system, the human species, we had to function as a healthy system, because that's what natural selection creates. Healthy bodies, healthy psychologies, healthy cultures, family, tribes of tribe species, healthy relationship with our ecology, and simply for destroying our ecology as a species. Those species don't hang around too long, let me give you some examples, so I often think of kangaroos, So kangaroos is this interesting thing. They'll have a little bite of grass, and then they'll hop a little bit, and they'll have another bite of grass, and then hop a little bit and have another bite of grass. So why would they do that? That's incredibly inefficient. Like, it's a lot of energy to be jumping around just to get a bite of grass, right? So why would they do that? Well, here's the thing. If they just go in one area and ate all the grass, when all the grass was gone, moved on to another, ate all the grass there, the land around them, the ecology in which they live in, will be destroyed. Because when you take away all the grass, and it just turns to mud and it floods. But you take away some of the grass here, and you take away some of the grass there, and you're leaving grass behind you as you go on, then the ecology is maintained. So they do this behavior. They don't know why they're doing it, but they do it because if they didn't do it, they wouldn't survive, because they're a healthy relationship with their ecology, because that's absolutely necessary for that species to survive. So we would have done the same thing. We would have been healthy in our physical bodies, in our psychologies, in our cultures, and so on. Now, there's a few paradoxes. We would have been healthy, but it would have been very challenging times, right? Because nature's always testing, And so it's not that we were like healthy and had well-being and all that stuff, and life was easy. It's the very opposite. We had healthy and well-being because life was very hard. And if we didn't have our health and well-being and all this stuff, we'd be deselected and wouldn't do very well. So it's a little hard to get our heads around that the difficult, not all the time difficult, a lot of time calm and peaceful and restful, but it's still challenging to survive, and difficulty there. If you look at any natural system, any animal, like for example, let's just take a look at lions in natural systems, So you might think they're at the top of they're the apex predator. They have a great time. Life's easy for them, But it's not really, actually. It's very challenging because they must pick the easiest targets to take down, and they must take them down efficiently. Because if they don't take them down efficiently, they run the risk of starving. Like if they have one chase and two chases and they don't get them, 3 chases, they're running out of food, or they could be getting very weak. and so on. So that they are constantly under the pressure of starvation. And to be very efficient in what they do is required of them. So it's a difficult life being a lion, okay? But it's also like a lot of the time they're hanging around resting, because it would be grossly inefficient to be chasing food all the time. You'd be burning up so much energy. It's better to chase food as best you can for brief periods of time. There's time you're resting, digesting, doing all that stuff, hanging out with the kids or the family or whatever, okay? And there's more to it too. There's a few other paradoxes in there as well, but that's one paradox of natural systems. And that's what it's like for us. We were healthy and well, had to be tough times. And then all of a sudden we broke free of natural systems for technical reasons I'll get into. The gene trait link and all that stuff, and the change in the food supply and all that. And here's the interesting thing is we no longer have to be healthy to survive. We could have very sick bodies, very sick psychologies, very toxic cultures, detrimental to our environment and so on, and we would still survive because the food kept coming. So we were no longer regulated by this kind of law of natural selection that you have to have health and well-being. And we were just, we could exist any way we wanted. And we just started existing in a state of lots of diseases and wars and terrible things going on, right? And there's more complexity to it than that, but basically we went from a state of well-being in natural systems to a species that was in disorder and filled with disease, filled with physical diseases, psychological diseases, cultural diseases, all kinds of problems. And we've been there for 6,000 to 10,000 years. We've been in this state of disease. And it's been interesting because technology has developed and so on, and the disease has expressed itself differently in this. We talk about the dynamics of the disease and what happens, how it's processed later on. So this is the state of the species now, and the state of disease. And that's the second premise, to understand that natural systems create well-being and healthy systems, and we have not been functioning like that for a long time. Let's talk about a few other interesting things. And we will be, for the rest of this, we're going to be looking at these ideas in much more depth, and the intricacies of it, and the dynamics of it, and some of the complexities of it. But I don't want to get too complex. I want to try and keep it as simple as possible, but sometimes you just have to describe things a little bit complexly, because there's no other way to describe them. Now, but let me, a kind of corollary from the second premise, which is really interesting. So, and this is, one up for debate and discussion, I believe it, but it's up for debate and discussion because it hasn't happened yet, But I believe we are now entering a period in our species, and we are in the midst of it now, when we are recovering from this disorder as a species, right? So previously, we regulated our well-being and our health as a species, as a tribes of families, of individuals and relationships and physiology and diet and so on. We regulated that because it was an absolute necessity for survival within a natural system. But now we're entering a phase, due to the profound level of technology that we're entering now, is that we have to step up and once again learn how to regulate our health and well-being as a species. Not in the same way we did before, in a new way, because the threat of extinction due to our level of technology is present again, and we all feel it. And our capacity. So there's so that's one corollary. We are now at the point where this period of disease and disorder in our species is kind of like coming to a fever. We'll either die from this disease as a species, or we'll overcome it and learn how to self-regulate our well-being as a species living outside of a natural selective system, which is interesting. That's the time we live in. That's kind of the first corollary from the second premise. And the second corollary from the second premise is this: our capacity to create well-being and health in our species, in our lives, in our bodies, in our relationships, in our families, in our communities, in our cities, our tribes, our nations, in the world. Our capacity to do this is immense. And here's why. because as a natural system, that's exactly what we were evolved to do. And that's kind of wonderful. And why aren't we doing it? Well, the problem is we're not conscious of what's happening. We're not conscious of that this is what we need to do, but our capacity is immense. I mean, look at how brilliant we are. We're amazing. It's just amazing how crazy we are in our capacities and our so much wonderful things about us as humanity, as a human species. And we'll get into some of those attributes as well. The important thing is our capacity to do this is immense. We just don't have the consciousness to be aware that we need to do this. And that's what this is all about. Becoming aware of this completed model. And there's a lot I have to share with you yet. There's a lot of dynamics that are important to understand so we can address this transition of becoming something that just hasn't existed in the species before. The human species existing in a state of well-being and appropriate self-regulating our well-being is it's quite interesting. Some of the dynamics we learn about that. But that's the time we live in. Isn't that a wonderful time that you and I, for the first time ever, our species can become self-aware of what's happening to it and can respond to that with our intelligence and our insight and our amazing ability to do things competently and well, and bring our inspiration and our insight and everything that we have to this challenge, and know that it is well within our grasp, well within our ability. We just need to reach for it, and it's there. And the first step is becoming conscious, because if you're not conscious of the completed model, it's impossible to see. So this is the journey we've begun. I hope you're excited. I hope your mind is buzzing. I'm sure some of it your thoughts are absolutely rejecting, because this causes a cognitive dissonance to what you were told to believe about the human species, which really isn't the model at all. It's just some interesting dynamics that are described of how to try and manage the whole thing and the interesting ways of understanding it, but it doesn't in any way qualify as being a completed model of that, of the ideas that are out there about what's going on. Not that they're inherently bad ideas, they're just not a completed model, and all that. And I'll talk to you more about how I developed it and where it comes from, and a bit more about modeling. But let's take a quick review and identify the pieces of this you have a problem with. And instead of rejecting the whole thing, just say, that's the piece I'm okay with this and this and this and this, but that piece, not so sure about. Let's look into that more deeply. And sometimes there's paradoxes. I described one of the paradoxes, a few more paradoxes that have to be examined. Because paradox sometimes make it look like, oh, this is wrong, that doesn't make sense. But actually, just because once you have a bit more insight, you realize it does. And that's what I spent the last 30 or so years looking into and investigating, developing the model and so on. So the first premise is we're currently not a natural system. At one point we were. The three questions that reveal it all is, when did this happen? When did we move from being a natural system to no longer being one? Why did it happen? What impact did it have? Look at what's happened since that time, right? Clearly not a natural system, a system busy building itself, but at the same time tearing itself apart. And we're going to talk about that dynamic of these two forces and how all that works. But certainly a system ripping itself apart, a diseased system, which doesn't even understand why it's doing it. But now you do. Now you can understand. And the last one then is probably the toughest one. The natural systems create healthy, well-being systems on all levels. And that's a bit hard to understand because there's a little bit of a paradox there, because there's well-being, it's still very challenging times, and that's why it's well-being, because it has to be, because it's been challenged to be a well-being, and nothing less than that would be accepted as it evolves. That's the second premise. And then the first corollary is this is the time when this period of disorder and disease in our species comes to an end. And the second corollary from the second premise is that this is something we are made to achieve, to create well-being and health in these systems. That's what we did for all those years in natural selection when we were natural systems. That's what we were doing. That's what we were evolved to do. We have this capacity to create well-being and health, to self-regulate. And we just need to learn to do that outside of being a natural system. I hope you found this fascinating, exciting, might be raking your head a little bit, but stay with it. And we're going to explore. Once you have this kind of completed model, you can see it all. Then we can explore so many different aspects of it and dynamics that I haven't even touched upon yet, but that I will share with you. And it changes your consciousness. It changes your fundamental understanding of who you are, what's happening, what's going on in the world, what your relationship is to all that is going on in the world around you and within you. This consciousness changes all this, has the potential to change all this in a very wonderful way. Having an understanding, a completed model of the human species can give you a wonderful focus and a meaning and a purpose as to what you're supposed to do with your wonderful gifts and talents. And it can also give us collectively, as we all collectively embrace this new consciousness, helps us to understand our connectedness, our collective operating towards purpose. It opens up, and us sharing this, not alone as having this new model, helps you to tap into your power and ability as a human being, what your potential is, to address this concern, to help it move forward, and to develop greater insight and greater potency to help our species through this transition into something wonderful and interesting. But it also opens up the superpower of the human species. And the superpower of the human species is our ability to collaborate to achieve things. It's an amazing power, an amazing ability. And having a completed model and sharing it and knowing it together allows us to collaborate, to work together, to share our capacities and our intelligence and our creativity and our insights and our ability to develop and innovate and figure things out. And it allows us to collaborate and work together to help the species make this transition, which is just a wonderful thing. So it's all ahead of us. I believe this is the time. I've been aware of this model for nearly 30 years by myself. I'm the only person aware of it, sitting with it, thinking about it, fascinated by it. But now I think the whole world will wake up to it, and everybody will be aware of it, And this opens this wonderful opportunity for meaningful lives and collaboration and path forward, clearer to see when you understand the model, when you understand the terrain that we're going through right now more clearly. So I'm looking forward to going on this journey with you. Looking forward to collaborating with you. Looking forward to discussing these ideas and sharing more about the completed model of the human species.